And good morning and welcome to another live stream. It's been a few weeks. My apologies, but I haven't been that well. I've had a few heart issues, which is a bit scary. But first things first, um, all those people who are listening, I'll get you to hit that subscribe button for me on YouTube and hit the thumbs up button. And if you want to put in any comments in the chat section, or leave any comments afterwards, please feel free, even if you don't agree with me. That's perfectly fine. Now, I listened to the Senate inquiry the other week, and I have to say I was quite impressed with the majority of the people who took part, who were speaking at this Senate inquiry. Unfortunately, there was one or two people who spoke about themselves, and I think we all know who those people might be. And they didn't actually speak about the proposed reforms. Now, we all know that there's organised crime, according to Bill Shorten, who have accessed about $4 billion worth of funding through organised crime, and plus, people doing the wrong thing with their funding. The public has the right to know, the taxpayers have a right to know where their money's going, how it's being spent, and if the outcomes that they're investing their money in is being achieved. Now, that's true for any government, local, state, or federal, which I agree with. But what does concern me is the fact that the government can make a final decision and remove you from the NDIS or cut your funding back, and there's no way to appeal that process, which I think is absolutely deplorable. It's wrong. I've experienced this myself. I've spoken to NDIA staff who didn't know the difference between being blind and being vision impaired. And I've heard other horror stories as well with different disabilities. If we're going to be assessed on our disabilities, then we need to be assured that those people doing the assessments have a good knowledge of what they're assessing us on. Another issue is having a primary disability. Now, when I first went on the NDIS, they asked me, because I've got multiple disabilities, they asked me what my primary disability is, and I said, well, I'm not going to answer that because it purely depends on what I'm doing at the time with, and that task I'm doing, can affect a specific disability. That wasn't good enough. So they made the choice of putting me down as being blind as my primary disability, without me okaying it. Now, the young woman who was doing all this, I had all my personal information laid out, and there was 2 LACs and a support worker, and they were all strangers, and I had all my personal information laid out. Now, the only people who knew 100% of my medical history was myself and my doctor. Now, anybody can have access to that information from the NDIA, and we all know that the NDIA is not safe and secure, because in November last year, someone sold 11,000 records to a couple of different service providers. And then a couple of months later, it comes out that senior management at the NDIA got kickbacks from a organisation called Salesforce, which was the software that the NDIA was using at a cost of $129 million a year. Now, I know for a fact that the data that's backed up on Salesforce, some of it's not kept here in Australia. is kept overseas, which is another issue. But getting back to the appeals process, if we're going to be assessed by someone who doesn't know what they're doing and doesn't understand the disability, and we don't have the right to appeal that process, then that's a basic fundamental flaw of the NDIA. And I understand what Bill Shorten and a lot of other people are saying, that the growth currently with the NDIA is around 20% and it should be sitting around 8%. And they need to save money and they need to make these reforms. And these reforms are going to take a few years to kick in. Stage one has just gone through or is going through. But not allowing people to appeal that process is a breach of our human rights, in my opinion. We've got to be able to speak up and say, you're wrong. You need to do this again and look at these issues. Now, during that Senate inquiry, there was a woman there who was 81 years old, whose daughter in the 60s acquired a disability. She was kicked off the NDIS, and it had to go through the AAT process, and it took about 18 months before that happened, and she got back onto the NDIS. But this family was out $150,000 in those 18 months. Where's that money coming from those families? 150,000. I'm lucky to have $200 in my bank account. This is going to be a problem of the government having the last say of who is and who isn't eligible, and okaying whatever assessment goes through from the NDIA, and we don't have a way to appeal that. It's just wrong. There's going to be so many people hurt through this. It's a I don't know. It's just understand it. It's a basic fundamental right to be able to redress your government and appeal any decision. Even illegal immigrants have the right to appeal and get free legal. But people with disabilities, we don't get to appeal any decisions. How does that work? So that's one thing that scares me. It truly does. Another thing that really scares me is the misinformation and half truths that some people are spewing out in social media platforms. And all it's doing is alarming and distressing other people with disabilities. Now, I've had to reach out to numerous people because I didn't understand different parts of the legislation. So I reached out to different people. I asked the questions. I got the answers that I needed. And I've got someone coming next week who we're going to go through the reforms that are coming in. And one major part of the reform that I truly do support is having a national register of support workers, including independent support workers. So I know there's an independent support worker here where I live who provides one-on-one supports for 3 people with 12-hour shifts in one day. How you get 36 hours out of 24, I don't know, but she's doing it. And she's also an extended family member of these people. Now, having a national register, it could help the government audit independent support workers to make sure they have the right credentials, insurances, first aid, CPR, working with police check, working with children's check, insurances, qualifications to help people with different disabilities with dysphasia or dysreflexia. Now, I've had friends with different disabilities, spinal cord injuries, brain injuries, intellectual disabilities, a whole range of different disabilities. And I know that some of these independent support workers are doing the wrong thing. I've been contacted by people even out of the state. I'm in New South Wales. I have people from Victoria and Queensland contact me through an email asking me how do I get these support workers to do the right thing? Do I have to stay with these support workers? Can I go elsewhere? Can I go to a different service provider? And before we start getting deep down into the different things, I think what we need to do as a community is make sure everyone has a really good understanding of the basics. That you can choose your support worker, independent support worker, you can choose your service provider, and within that service provider, you can choose your support workers. We have to get the basics down before we can move on to the next step. And these people who concentrate on 2% of the reforms that they don't agree with, and they just keep going on about it and telling half truths and deliberately putting misinformation out there and scaring people. We need to come together as a community. Even when we don't agree with each other, we need to come together as a community and work together to benefit the whole. Unfortunately, there's a few people who just only worry about themselves. You know, their freedom of choice, their rights, and they don't care about anyone else. Now, during the Senate inquiry on the second day, there was a woman there who was being paid by the DSS to facilitate meetings, public meetings, and she stated nobody's come to her about having their funding cut. Well, that's 100% grade A bull plop because I've heard from numerous people of having their funding cut by 30, 40, $50,000 without notice. And there's a point system coming in, which I don't really understand, and I'm going to talk about that next week. But today I just wanted to talk about having the right to appeal a decision made by the government or by the NDIA. Like, I'm totally blind. I lost my sight in 1998 because of MS. And I use a MacBook Pro and VoiceOver. And my skill levels in that aren't that high. And when you ring up the NDIA, oh, we got staff who thinks it's quite easy. Well, I'm in my 60s. You can't compare me to somebody in their 20s who's worked with this technology their whole life. Because when I left school in 79 or about 1979, they ummed and ahed on whether we can use a calculator in our maths test. And look at what we have now. We have computers, smartphones, internet, artificial intelligence. So you can't compare one person to another person. And if I'm going to be assessed by someone in their 20s, then they have to understand that my skill levels aren't that good because I can't keep up with the changes. And if they put in a report in for an assessment that doesn't actually support what I need, how do I go about getting that report changed and that decision reversed? I don't know. And hopefully next week when I talk to this other person coming on, I'll ask these questions and get those answers. But it scares the hell out of me not having that appeals process. I know I've been through the AAT process back when I first went on the NDIS, and they deliberately dragged it out. The NDIA, they made it so hard that I just gave up, and that's not fair. But during the Senate inquiry, um, one of the things that really hurt me, especially with Senator Steele, John, referring to disabled people. And there's another person who uses that phrase as well, disabled people. Why are we focused on the disability first? Why not focus on the person first? Why isn't it a person with a disability or people with disabilities, not a disabled person or disabled people? I'm a person first. My disabilities come second. And that should go for all of us. Anyway, it's probably it from my rant this week, but also I just wanted to, I mentioned at the start of the stream that I've had a few heart issues. Um, a couple of weeks ago on my watch, I got an Apple Watch, and it came up with warning heart fibrillation detected. See your GP. So my support worker and I went into my health app and looked into it, and it's been going off since March this year. So I contacted my doctor, and he said, "Oh well, those watches aren't that reliable." But he took me, except for a heart scan, I had to wear a heart monitor for 24 hours. And about a week later, I get a call from my doctor and said, "Oh, look, when you had that heart monitor on, you had quite a few issues." No, I've now got to see a cardiologist. So if you have a smartwatch and one of those warnings come up, don't dismiss it. It worked for me. Maybe it'll work for you. Don't disregard it. Be safe. Be proactive, not reactive. Um, Next week, I'm having someone come up from Carers and Advocates Australia, and we're going to go through and talk about the reforms that are going through or gone through, and we're going to dissect it bit by bit so everyone gets a good understanding. And I encourage as many people as possible to come along and to listen and to ask questions and to say something if you don't agree. All right, I think we might end it there, Chris, please. Okay, I appreciate everyone coming in and listening today, and I'll talk to everyone next week. Thank you.